In my past videos, I've spoken a lot about villains, both what makes a good villain and how a villain can fail as a character. But one thing I haven't mentioned is the villains who decide to turn good. And like all tropes, there are right ways to do this and there are wrong ways to do this. And sometimes the best way to show just how to get it right is through comparison. So today I'm going to compare two villains that went through their own redemption arcs. In the positive corner we have Prince Zuko, the firebending, honour-obsessed antagonist of Avatar: The Last Airbender. And in the negative corner we have Kylo Ren, the controversial leader of the First Order and antagonist of the Star Wars sequels. So before we do this comparison, I'd like to talk about the basics of what a redemption arc needs to be good. First, the villain in question needs to be at least somewhat sympathetic. Having a completely despicable villain do a U-turn and become good will often seem unrealistic and unsatisfying as a result. At best, you can have the villain become a token evil teammate who is under control and no longer a threat, but at worst, you'll have a botched attempt at garnering sympathy for a character the audience has been taught to despise, thus cannot bring themselves to even so much as tolerate. Second, the villain needs a solid reason to turn good. Whether it's a sudden realization of how evil they've become, realization that their enemies were good people after all, or feeling that all their actions have been for naught. There should be a catalyst. That said, a redemption arc should still be a journey for the character. If you want us to believe that they've changed, we need to see their struggle and we need to see them overcome it, so that it feels like they've truly earned their newfound place amongst the heroes. So back to our two examples. Let's start by laying out their stories. Zuko is the Prince of the Fire Nation and son of the big bad of the series, Fire Lord Ozai. He's been rejected by his father, who favours his sister Azula, then burns and exiles him when he speaks out against a Fire Nation general. His goal in life is now to capture the Avatar in order to win back his father's respect and love. Kylo Ren is the child of Han Solo and General Leia Organa, who, as a youngster, wished to train to be a Jedi under his uncle Luke Skywalker. However, as he was training him, Luke sensed him turning to the dark side and very briefly contemplated killing him. Seeing this, Kylo immediately turned against him and left to be trained by Snoke and attempt to rebuild the Empire. So, you may notice that both of these characters have relatively sympathetic backstories, and that is a good thing. As I've said, rule 1 of redemption arcs is that they should focus on a character sympathetic enough to be redeemable. So, are these two fully redeemable? The first question to ask here is, why are they bad to begin with, and do they still have goodness within them? Let's start with Zuko. Zuko is bad because he was raised to believe the Fire Nation's invasion was a good thing. On top of that, he's been raised by an unloving father figure who's led him to believe he has to earn his love and respect. In other words, he doesn't really know any better and thinks this sort of life is normal. But there's something also worth noting here, that if there's one thing Zuko is known for, it's honour. Despite believing the propaganda of the Fire Nation and wanting them to succeed, Zuko will often stand up to people on his side that he sees as dishonourable, like Zhao or Azula. Zuko clearly does have morals deep down. The worst thing we ever see him do is betraying Aang and Katara to side with Azula when he's given the choice to fight with them. Despite this being a betrayal, we can still see that Zuko is just desperate to be home again, and Azula is very good at manipulating him. While this action may be terrible and does have some very dangerous consequences, it is still forgivable. Now let's look at Kylo Ren. The problem with Kylo is that, unlike Zuko, Kylo's villainy stems from one incident with Luke Skywalker. While this incident is clearly something that would scar someone for life, you would expect his beef should just be with Luke and Luke alone. Wanting vengeance against Luke is understandable, but wanting to take over the galaxy and start a new empire is less understandable. While one could argue Snoke was the one manipulating him, Snoke is not nearly as developed as someone like Azula, and Kylo doesn't seem to really listen to authority figures half the time anyway, so it feels a lot less convincing. If Kylo's main goal was to become a Sith Lord and hunt down Luke Skywalker, fair enough, but his goals have nothing to do with Luke, and it genuinely does feel like Luke was right, and he really was just a selfish tyrant waiting to be unleashed onto the world. While Zuko always had his morals despite working for the bad side, Kylo Ren seems consistently cruel and selfish, and very much did feel like he was just doing whatever the hell he wanted. But then we have to compare Kylo Ren's worst action. Despite his grudge being against Luke, Luke is not the character who suffers his wrath. Han Solo is. Han Solo, up to this point, seems to have done not really very much wrong. Okay, maybe he wasn't the best father, but he clearly cares about his son, doesn't want to hurt his son, and gets killed trying to calmly convince him to come home. If Kylo Ren had killed Luke here, it would have been bad, but at least an understandable moment of vengeance. Killing Han Solo has no justification to it. It should be the moment he establishes that he is the villain and there's no turning back. It should be the moral event horizon, but it's not. His redemption is still consistently teased as a possibility. And I'm not saying it would be impossible to redeem such a character, just that it is a lot harder and needs a lot more work. So if that's what made them villains in the first place, let's look at what convinces them to turn face. Zuko's redemption was clearly planned from the beginning. During Season 1, we get little hints of it, such as teasing a potential friendship with Aang. Then in Season 2, Zuko spends a great deal of time on the run, with at least one episode dedicated entirely to him, where he starts to meet the citizens of the Earth Kingdom and realises that yes, they are people too, and they despise the Fire Nation for what they've done to their country. When he makes his choice to stay with the Fire Nation, he is clearly conflicted and unsure, and then finally, the catalyst of him leaving is Ozai's plan to burn the Earth Kingdom to cinders, finally confirming to him that yes, they were the bad guys all along. So, he stands up to his father and leaves to help Team Avatar. And while they don't trust him at first, he well and truly works hard to prove he's changed and earn their trust. Kylo Ren's arc was clearly not planned at all. On 2 occasions, his redemption is teased, but then completely squashed and thrown away. First, Han Solo reaches out to him, but he kills him. Then he decides to kill Snoke, but still chooses to stay with the First Order in the end, even taking over from Snoke. Both of these actions seem to hammer in that Kylo Ren is and will always be the bad guy. On top of that, you have to ask, what really makes him turn good again? To which the answer is, I don't know exactly. Like I said, we spend an entire episode with Zuko exploring his character development and learning how much his people have hurt the Earth Kingdom. With Kylo Ren, we don't properly explore his development outside of when he's becoming a worse person. What is his real inner conflict, and what is driving him to abandon his newfound power with the First Order? Well, the obvious answer to this is his new relationship with Rey, but why? Some may argue he was in love with Rey, but this is never made clear outside of one awkward kiss, so it receives absolutely no development. On top of that, we've seen multiple times that he still loves his mother, so how come his mother, who he's known his entire life, isn't able to convince him to come back, but this girl he barely knows is suddenly able to? Funnily enough, the only times when Kylo Ren's desire to turn face feel genuine are the moments when he feels his connection to Leia. But those are only brief moments, and they don't exactly make up for all those scenes of him slaughtering people. While Rey does often try to convince him to come back, he usually rejects her or screws her over, to the point where when Rey finally stabs him during their duel, it feels more like a too little too late moment. Yeah, sorry Ben, but I've given you bucket loads of chances and every bloody time you screw me over. And don't tell me it's because someone else is in your head, because Snoke's dead, and you've made it clear that you're trying to double-cross Palpatine, so this is all on you, Ben. Screw you. The whole situation just clearly hasn't been thought through or planned, and I get the feeling the writer of The Last Jedi had a different idea of where the character was going to the writer of The Rise of Skywalker. What makes Kylo Ren's failure to redeem himself sad is that it definitely did have legs and could have worked, if it had been properly thought through and the seeds had been planted without being repeatedly ripped up and shoved back into the ground. Perhaps the perfect comparison between these two characters is that they both have a scene where they reunite with their father figures. With Zuko, it's reuniting with Uncle Iroh, the man who's acted as a true father figure and positive role model towards him, who he betrayed a season earlier. Zuko is incredibly apologetic, tearfully admits that he screwed up and won't blame Iroh for rejecting him, at which point Iroh immediately embraces him and tells him how proud he is that he's returned. It well and truly shows that Zuko does regret everything he's done and just how much he values Iroh, who taught him how to be a truly honourable person. But at the same time, as Iroh says, he came to the light entirely on his own. His redemption was his own choice. By contrast, in The Rise of Skywalker, Kylo Ren has a vision of his dead father. There, Han Solo is kind and forgiving of his son, but Kylo Ren rarely shows any emotion at all. He's not apologetic, he's just kind of broken and still unsure of what to do. Unlike Zuko, who at this point had overcome his struggles and found his true path, Kylo still has to be told what to do. He doesn't seem sad about the pain he's caused, he's just mopey because he's confused. He doesn't apologise to Han for what he's done, and we've seen this man slaughter so many innocent people, but by the end, his redemption can be summarised as Daddy tells him to stop being bad and play nice with his new friend. Funny how, when it comes to being good, Kylo has to be told what to do, yet when it comes to being bad, he comes up with all kinds of his own little ideas, like killing Snoke or planning to double-cross Palpatine and rule the galaxy with Rey. By contrast, Zuko is bad because he's being constantly told what to do, and when he finally sees the light, he stands up to his father and finds his own path alone. It's like Zuko truly chooses to turn good because he sees it's the right thing to do, while Kylo just does it because he feels guilty. This is reflected in their endings. Zuko replaces Ozai as Fire Lord and brings about a new age of peace. Kylo, on the other hand, makes an anticlimactic heroic sacrifice. He gives up his energy for Rey. Why? The kiss suggests because he loves her, but no. To me, it's because guilt. Because he's a terrible person who doesn't know how to be good. So instead of making any amends, he dies to give life to someone who does know how to be good. As she can do the job instead now. Unlike Darth Vader, who also dies in a heroic sacrifice, but does so saving his son and also finally putting a stop to the Empire, Kylo Ren dies saving a girl he doesn't really know all that well after she already saved the day. It's almost like the writers realised he hadn't done enough, so had to shove in a heroic sacrifice. Ultimately, I cannot emphasise enough that the biggest difference between these characters and how they're written is that it's blatantly obvious that Zuko was planned to be redeemed, whereas plans for Kylo were just all over the place. Zuko is clearly shown to be the perfect parallel to Aang, and someone who is a good person deep down. And when he starts to turn, the series compensates for losing him as an antagonist by bringing forth a far more evil antagonist in the form of Azula. Kylo Ren, on the other hand, I don't think had any solid plans in place. He goes through multiple failed redemption attempts and is consistently used as the antagonist because, well, who else do they have? General Hux, the Palpatine clone, the reanimated corpse of Snoke. Because he has to fill the villain role, he doesn't get enough time as a hero, and he doesn't get enough time dedicated to his potential face turn. like I say, Zuko had the seeds planted in Season 1, then goes through major developments in Season 2, and then finally turns in Season 3. Kylo, on the other hand, has some seeds planted in Episode 7, then crosses the moral event horizon, proving he's a villain. Then he talks to Rey a bit in Episode 8, and has yet another chance at redemption, but throws that one away too, once again establishing himself as the big villain. But then in Episode 9, despite his villainy, he gets yet another chance at redemption, which amounts to him just fighting some dudes in New Palpatine's lair, then dying for Rey in a really anticlimactic fashion, because their relationship just wasn't nearly well developed enough. What makes this sad is that this character really did have a lot of potential. He could have worked as a straight up villain, or he could have been redeemed if some real planning had gone into his character arc. Instead, what do we get? Just an unconvincing face turn from a character who no longer deserves our sympathy. Zuko's redemption arc is considered one of the absolute best, and while Kylo Ren's might not be the worst, it is, in my eyes, the one with the most wasted potential. Thanks for watching the video. What are your thoughts on these characters? Do you love Zuko? Do you hate Kylo Ren? Or do you have completely different feelings towards them? Whatever your thoughts, be sure to share them down below, like, share and subscribe and all that jazz, and I hope to speak to you again soon. Goodbye!